Chapter 5. Speaking Treason. Zared sat on his chair on the slightly raised dais in his reception gallery, trying to hold his temper. Generally, he enjoyed holding open court, but this Thursday afternoon had brought such evil news, he knew there would be little delight left in the day. Ranged before him were 6 men, 4 peasants from his southern border with the west, and, for the gods' sakes, Jannemeyer Goldman, the master of the Coriolanese guilds himself, and one of his merchant cronies, Branson Hevrand. The tidings they had brought would sour anyone's day, Zared thought, let alone mine. A third, he muttered yet again. Obviously the guilds, as the merchants, would be crippled by the tax, but these peasants, gods, they'd had a third of their year's grain confiscated? Gustus, Zared called, and the captain of his guard stepped forward. See that these peasants receive recompense from the treasury for their losses. Gustus nodded and moved off. The peasants effused thanks to their prince, then scurried after the captain. Zared eyed Goldman thoughtfully. As master of the Coriolanese guards, Goldman was one of the most powerful non-noble men in Tencendor. He controlled not only great wealth, but was the voice of traders, craftsmen, and businessmen of Carlon, and by default most of Tencendor. And nobles of the West en route to complain to him? Sir, Gustus said, one of the Lake Guard has this minute landed with a summons from Star Sun Salem. Every eye in the reception gallery was riveted at the captain of the guard. A summons? Zared asked quickly. Sir Prince, Star Sun Salem summons the heads of the 5 to council, to be held at Sighold 3 weeks hence. Zared stared at him, then shifted his glance back to Hermie and Theod. I seem to be holding a dinner party this evening. Would you 2 gentlemen care to join me? Goldman placed his fork and knife across his plate, and decided it was time to direct the conversation to more important matters. So far, they'd discussed everything from the weave of Corallian silk to the exceptional salinity of the Widowmaker Sea, and Goldman was tired of these niceties. He smiled at the young, impish Duke Theod across the table. Theod was a rascal, but good-hearted, and once he'd grown 5 or 6 more years and survived a tragedy or 2, he would become as fine a duke as his grandfather, Roland, who Goldman remembered well from his youth. You must have ridden hard to reach Severin from Alderney, Duke Theod, as must, Goldman glanced at Hermie, your companion, who had come yet farther. Hermie and I were both at my home estates, Goldman. We share a common interest in the management of the western ranges. Goldman nodded to himself. Theod's home estates were close to his northern border with Zared. No wonder they'd managed to get here so quickly. And no doubt you were both as horrified as Hevrand and myself to hear Askim's new taxes. No doubt, Hermie said carefully. He was not quite sure of Goldman, nor of the motives which saw him at Zared's court. Enough, Zared said, throwing his napkin on the table and leaning back in his chair. Goldman, you came north to say something. Say it. Sir Prince, as you know, Prince Askim's taxation measures will place an unfair burden on many Tencendorians, rich as well as poor, traders as well as peasants. Goldman paused and looked about the room, pretending to gather his thoughts. Yet, if Askim's taxation measures affect poor and wealthy, peasant and noble alike, he continued, these taxes do differentiate between types of people. The entire table stilled. Hevrand, who knew what was coming, looked hard at the napkin on his lap, but the other 3 men's eyes were riveted on Goldman's face. Continue, Master Goldman, Zared said. Sir Prince, Askim's measures affect those people living in the west and the north, not those living in the rest of Tencendor. And your point is? Goldman took a deep breath. Sir Prince, the Akari and Avar do not feel the strain of Askim's petty taxation, yet the Akarites, be careful with your phraseology, Zared said quietly. Yet the human population of the west and north, good prince, are direly affected by it. Sir Prince, there are many among the western and northern populations of Tencendor who stoutly believe that Askim's taxations are unfair in that they discriminate against one race out of 3. The Ravensbund men are affected by it as well, Hermie put in carefully. Sir Duke, the Ravensbund only trade with the people of the north. They care not if Ascom starts demanding a life per cargo of goods transported through the west. Zered steepled his fingers before his face and pretended an interest in them. And so, your request is that you raise the issue with Starson Salem at the Council of Five, Sir Prince. Starson is the only one with the authority to rebuke Ascom, to force him to rescind the tax. That had not been the original request that Goldman and Hevron had come to the north with. Their plans had been hastily revised with the news of the Council of Five. But they were not dismayed. Far from it. Starson Salem had played right into their hands. Sir Prince, many among the human race of Tensendor, the Acarites, my Lord Zered, for I am not afraid to use the term, feel that Ascom's taxes are not only unfair, but illegal. And why is that, Goldman? The talk of the taverns and the streets of Carlon argues that Ascom is not the legal overlord of the West, Sir Prince. Goldman paused, gathered his courage, and then spoke his treason. Most Acarites believe that you are. Silence. Zered's eyes regarded Goldman closely over his fingers. Yes? Sir Prince, when Axis created the nation of Tensendor, he created Belial as Prince of the West. Few were loath to speak out against that. Belial was a loved man, and remains a loved memory, but his elevation essentially replaced the office of King of Akar. Axis destroyed the throne of Akar after he defeated his brother, Bornheld. Zered, you are the only legitimate heir to the throne of Akar. Hermie leaned back in his chair. True, and true, good Goldman, he thought. I could not have put it better myself. Speak on, man. Goldman did indeed hurry on. Sir Prince, you may have been disinherited of a crown, but more importantly, the Acarites have been disinherited of their throne and their nationhood. Zered spoke again, his voice now noticeably tight. Continue. Have not the Akari and the Avar and the Ravensbund their titular heads? Yet the Acarites have lost their monarchy, and in so losing their pride. Sir Prince, why is it that the Akari, Avar, and Ravensbund retained or gained kings when the Acarites lost theirs? Perhaps, Hermie put in carefully, for this was something Zered could not say without proving disloyal to at least one of his brothers. It is because Bornheld, as King of Akar, was far too closely allied with the Seneschal and pursued a policy of hatred and war toward the Avar and Akari. Axis rightly wanted to ensure that that never happened again. Goldman looked directly at Zered. Sir Prince, I am not asking you to resurrect the beliefs of the Seneschal, only your people's pride and nationhood. Prince Zered, his voice slowed and he stressed every word. Your people want you back. They want their king. With few exceptions, Western Tensendor would rise up to back your claim. Goldman glanced at Hermie and Theod, hoping he had not read them incorrectly. True, Sir Duke? Sir Earl? We would not speak against it, Theod said slowly. Hermie hesitated, then said curtly, No king of Akar ever treated us as vilely as Ascom does. You all mouth treason, Zered said, and pushed his chair back as if he intended to stand. I do not intend to. Treason, Hevron repeated. Is it treason to speak of that which is our wish and your inheritance? Zered had stilled, his face expressionless. They are right, Zered, Theod added. Right. Akar needs its king back. Look how Ascom is tearing the heart and soul out of the West. May I remind you, Theod, Zered said carefully, that as a Duke of the West you are under Ascom's direct overlordship. As am I, Hermie said, and yet I find myself agreeing with both Theod and these two merchants here. Recreating the position of King of Akar would tear Tensendor apart, Zered observed, but his tone was milder and his eyes thoughtful. It is going to tear apart anyway, Goldman said very quietly. The tensions between Acarite and the other races would see war within a generation. You understand the Acarite perception of injustice, Zered. You share it. Sir Prince, you are rightful heir to the throne of Akar. Take it. Take it and direct some of this tension rather than letting it swell out of control. Take it, sire. When Goldman and Heverin retired, Zered waved at Hermie and Theod to remain. He sat motionless, silent for a long time before he finally spoke. "My friends, I do not know what to think. My parents raised me to believe in Tensendor, in Axis's and then Salem's right to rule over all races. They raised me to believe that the Akar nation and its monarchy was dead." "Zered," Hermie said, "re-establishing the monarchy of Akar is not treason. As with Freefall, Israel, and Sadumai, an Akarite king would still owe homage and fealty to the throne of the stars. Any discussion of reclaiming the throne of Akar is not mouthing treason against Salem, only discussing what many, nay, most people in the west and north want." Zered was silent, remembering how he had looked at the circlet on Priam's brow and wondered how well it, and the throne, would fit him. "Where do your loyalties lie, Hermie, Theod?" he eventually asked. "With whom?" "With Star-Sun Salem," Hermie said unhesitatingly. "First, and then with you," Theod finished. "Goldman has said much of what was in our hearts as well. Zered, if both the masters of the guilds in Carlon, as well as two of the West's most powerful nobles, have come to your doorstep with the same speeches on their lips and hopes in their hearts, how can you refuse to consider their words?" "This whole issue has been prompted by Ascom's taxes," Zered said. "What happens if Salem forces him to rescind them? What then?" "No," Theod said. "These taxes are but the final straw. Zered, the issue is fed by the fact that for decades resentment has grown among the Akarites at the way they have been treated. Yes, the Censor Order is great and good, but it doesn't change the fact that the Akarites have been denuded of their monarch and their nationhood. Man, listen to me. In you they can see the legitimate heir, and in the north they can see what prosperity awaits them under your rule." "This problem is not going to go away, Zered," Hermie said, "not as long as Ascom, or a prince of the West, remains." "I will think on what you have said this evening," Zered said, then raised his eyes from the fork he'd been fidgeting with. "There is something else I think should be considered." "Yes?" Hermie asked. "How will Ascom react to this council? We all know how bad his debts are. We know how he needs the monies the taxes will raise. And we all know how he hates you and your success," Theod said. "Look how he has striven to frustrate your heart these past few years." Zered looked at him sharply, then chose to ignore the last remark. He did not like to think of what implications this evening's conversation had for him and Leah, nor even for the peace of Tensendor itself. How would Salem react? "My friends, I think it best to be prepared for whatever this council might bring." Zered paused, then spoke his own treason. "I have given orders to move the bulk of my troops out of Severin to within several leagues of Jervois Landing. If I might suggest," Hermie grinned, "where would you like our troops moved?"